All right. Well, thank you, Dan. It is quite a pleasure to be invited to speak here. And it's kind of neat too, because we have a local creation club that's, oh, somebody's coming in. Because we started a local creation club here in St. Cloud, and they're meeting at the public library in an hour. Somebody else uh, is running that meeting. So that gives me time to do this. So that's a lot of fun. Let's see a little bit about myself. I'll try to screen share here a little bit. A picture's worth a thousand words. And let's see. Okay, here we go. And if you guys want to chat, I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but we'll just pretend this is working. All right. So let's see here. Oh boy, look at this. I got things blocked up here. Let me clean up some of this. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, yeah, we'll just block that all off. Yeah, the hydroplate theory is one of my favorite talks, and I gave this talk at St. Cloud State and I put it up on YouTube. And somebody commented and said, there are few things in life that have ever excited me as the topic of hydroplate theory. And so yeah, it's like having the answers to the exam before the questions come out. I mean, it seems like whenever they have a new discovery, the hydroplate can explain it. And whoopsie, let's see here. Okay. Yeah, it's a good witnessing tool. I got this email from somebody who said, I've been praying for her friend to come to know God for a while, and that he was praying that God would send intelligent Christian clients who would talk to him. Brian, you were an answer to prayer. Your conversation with her friend has opened his mind to believe I believe he's been watching your videos a bit because he shared one with me. And I thought, wow, that's pretty kind. But which video did he share? Because I got a couple hundred videos out there from, DNA and carbon dating and dinosaurs. And this is the one that he shared. It was the hydroplate overview. I squeezed the hydroplate into 15 minutes. I had 20 minutes to speak at the Rotary Club, and I shared the hydroplate theory with them. And it was during COVID where all the doors on the restaurant were open. So it was very background noise. I tried to edit it out and I couldn't do it, and the sound was horrible. But yet that's the video that he shared. So it tells me it's not the quality of the video, it's the content that really matters. And I was been invited to do a creation science revival in Wisconsin. And he said, we'll give you three talks Saturday plus Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evening. And I said, well, how about we do a creation Sunday? And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we can do a revival of truth, where we can take a look behind the vaccine curtain on Monday. This is where you get vaccine experts testifying under oath. And then two is the COVID corruption, and three is what the globalists have in store for us. When you reject God of the Bible, then the people tend to think that they're God, and they got some pretty disturbing plans for us. And then should I vaccinate my baby? I just took clips of a vaccine expert testifying under oath without any comment at all, and I put it up on YouTube and they censored it. And I just kind of touched that to and you can see these talks on Revival of Truth because we need all the information to make informed decisions, and that's not happening in our schools, museums, and government and media. So that's there, and I do that just to set the table for this. There's a bombshell of documentary it's going to be shown on Sunday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, I think. No, Pacific Time, 8 p.m. Pacific. I think it's 5 or 6, but whatever. And this is going to be there's a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study that's going to be released. And the people who did the study sent a cease and desist order letter to make them stop, but they're going to do it anyway. And I do this just because this is up from the Highwire. Yeah, 7 p.m. Central on Sunday. And so the Highwire protocol, they have a show every Thursday, and the protocol is they send out all the sources after the show. So you can look at the sources to see if they're interpreting it right. So the Highwire protocol, and that brings us to the hydroplate protocol. I suggest that whenever a theory is being presented, it should list the predictions that they've made or that they are making, and also the ones that were made accurate predictions. So Walt Brown writes, if predictions are missing, a theory is probably weak. If theories should not be published unless they include many details and specific predictions, we would be mercifully spared many distractions and false ideas. And so we're going to do the hydroplate protocol here at the beginning. We're going to show some of the predictions that have been made that were accurate. And there's 50 some predictions that Walt Brown has made. And if this theory be true, then there should be some accurate ones. And here's some of the accurate ones. Beneath major mountains are large volumes of pooled water. This was published in 1980 and it was confirmed in 2001. The crystalline rock under Gibraltar, the Bosporus and Dardanelles, and the Golden Gate Bridge will be found to be eroded into V-shaped notches. And it was published in 95 and it was confirmed in 98 and 2009 and 2018. And the soil and erosion channels on Mars will contain traces of Earth-like soluble compounds such as salt. And it was predicted in 2001 and it was confirmed in 2004. See, accurate predictions are the currency of science. And the more accurate predictions you have, the more solid and more robust your theory is. And then some comets and asteroids and meteoroids will be found to be made of crystalline material and forged in extreme heat. So they made the prediction in 2001 and it was verified in 2004 and 2005. And then some large near parabolic comets, as they fall toward the center of the solar system for the first time, will have moons. And that was confirmed in 98. And then asteroids are rock piles, often with internal ice acting as weak glue. Large rocks that began the capture process are near the centers of the asteroids and comets. And 4 years after they published it in 2001, it was measurements of the largest asteroid series found that it does indeed have a dense rocky core and mantle. And it was announced, yeah, let's see here. And then number 40, most of the rocks, pebble-sized and larger, comprising asteroids and comets, will be found to be rounded to some degree. This rounding occurred as the rocks tumbled and were eroded in the powerful fountains of the great deep, just as rocks are tumbled and rounded in fast-growing flowing streams. And this was announced, this was confirmed in 2014 with Comet 67P. They call them dinosaur eggs. And then Planet X will not be found in the next 5 years by January of 2021 because it does not exist. And they made that prediction in 2016 and it was confirmed in 2021. And then bones are organic material that contain enough carbon and are believed to be older than 100,000 years will be shown to be relatively young in blind radiocarbon tests. And it was published in 95 and it was confirmed in 2001. So he's just a little bit ahead of the curve every time. And then there's just one recently, HPD prediction fulfilled. NASA asteroid deflection test, DART, actually accidentally created a boulder swarm. This was Pastor Kevin Lee. He emailed Dr. Don Brownlee and warned him that if they try to redirect an asteroid, it'll work if it's a solid rock, but it could fail if it's a bunch of loosely held boulders, and it was a bunch of loosely held boulders. And then these are some of the discoveries that kind of validate the hydroplate theory. We had the accurate predictions, and now we're going to take a look at some discoveries. Contrary to what's in your textbooks, in 2019, NASA says that the Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. It's like, how does a rock come from the Earth to the moon, especially when it was crystallized about 12 miles beneath Earth's surface? How does that happen? Well, the hydroplate theory explains that. And then there's a lot of surprises out there. This is what they're discovering. A surprise in NASA's asteroid rocks hints Bennu came from an ocean world. And we'll look at this at the end. And then scientists discover building blocks of RNA in asteroid sample. And then asteroid Bennu is covered in carbon-bearing organic material consistent with ingredients for life. And so what I'm saying is life didn't come to Earth on an asteroid. We're saying that the life on Earth got propelled up into space and on the asteroids. And this theory will explain it. And then a strange new moon of asteroid Dinkinesh is weirder than thought after NASA probe finds contact binary. Yeah, this moon has a contact binary going around it, and so that's an impossibility based on the Big Bang. Okay, let's see. Whoops. And I'm going to just skip out. I'm going to stop sharing to see if anybody's in the waiting room. I'm not sure if that's going to be there. Let's see. And is everybody okay? Let's see. I'll escape this. Okay, everybody's there. I'm going to unmute you, Dan. And I'm going to unmute you. Is that everything okay? Let's see. Whoopsie. Sign in to see his profile. Oh boy. Okay, that's not going to work. Yeah, I'm just going
I'm
to make. Okay, can you
I'm
hear?
good.
You
I
can
can hear you. Everything's fine from my side.
you can hear me, you can see me. Okay, I'm going to leave you unmuted just in case you need to get a hold of me. And I do not see anybody in the waiting room. So, okay. I think I'm good. I just didn't want to leave anybody hanging. So we'll go back to sharing the screen. And let's see. Here we go. All right. Okay, well, I gave the eighth edition to a professor several years ago, and she had it for about 6 months. And the reason she took it because they don't have a theory for Grand Canyon, and this book does have a theory for Grand Canyon that makes sense. And she had it for about 6 months, and then we talked to her for about an hour and a half. And she said that if the assumption is true, the science works. She just didn't believe the assumption was true. And the assumption is half of the ocean was inside the earth at one time. She didn't believe that there was water inside the earth at one time. And it's like, why not? There's water inside of the earth today. We've got black smokers, some as hot as 667 degrees Fahrenheit. They were discovered in 1977. Those are the springs of the sea that Job wrote about thousands of years ago, and science finally caught up to it in 1977. See, the Bible is right. And it also talks about down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean is the hottest water on Earth in a supercritical state never seen before in nature. Supercritical, what is that? And it says supercritical water is seen jetting up from the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. Supercritical, that's the key to all of this. Supercritical, and most people have never heard of it. Okay, and in the beginning, this is the last book on Amazon. This was the eighth edition. They had one left. It's a $30 book, and they put a $280 price tag on it. Yeah, and it sold. Somebody paid for it because it's gone. And then you look at the used ones, those $30 books are going for $67. So that's the sign of a good theory when your books go up in value over time. You know, my college textbooks have gone down to virtually nothing right now. And you can learn more about the hydroplate theory. We had an online conference in 2003, and we had three PhDs plus several other people present. You can see that at hydroplate.org. And also, you can see it on Rumble. You can see it on YouTube. This one is on YouTube. Just search the hydroplate theory. And you get to see about 9 or 10, maybe 11 talks. And that gives you a good perspective. And one of them was even they had presented information that was accepted into a secular journal about trans-Neptune objects. You know, and so there's a lot of big hitters. There's actually a professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy that's been banging the hydroplate drum. And we're trying to get the hydroplate people and the catastrophic plate tectonic people to sit down and have a roundtable discussion where we can look at the strengths and weaknesses of each theory. And they are avoiding the microphone for a multitude of reasons. They do not want to do it. And so we couldn't have the roundtable, so we had a hydroplate seminar instead. And you can see this on Standing for Truth. They have a really good YouTube channel, and there's debates on almost every topic. And you can also see that on my YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith. And I've got a playlist just for the hydroplate. If you go there and you'll see Walt Brown explain the hydroplate theory in his own words, it's 8 minutes. And Walt went to heaven last week. So we lost the mental giant. I think of him as the Isaac Newton of our day. He had so many things figured out, and it was such a tragedy that this theory's been kicked to the curb for so long. I mean, I was motivated to get Walt the credit he deserves before he dies, and I don't think I got that in time. But then I was motivated to get this out there before NASA makes another catastrophic blunder. And now I'm motivated to get this out there to destroy the Big Bang. And that's how I was at a homeschool convention, and the keynote speaker was Alex Newman, and he went walking by my booth, and I said, "Hey, do you want to see a theory that will destroy the Big Bang?" And he said, "Yeah." And so he interviewed me about it, and I sent him some things, and it's like, yeah, this stuff should be discussed. We should put all the theories on the table, and I would suggest focus on the one that makes accurate predictions, because there's a confusion out there. These are screenshots from secular journals and articles, They just screenshot. Scientists, researchers want to know why. Unexpected, fossil oddity, long-standing puzzle. I totally didn't believe it. It shouldn't exist. Scientists puzzled. Double-ended mystery. Surprising features. Unanswered questions. Hard to believe. World of surprises. Major mystery. Wrong direction. Puzzle scientists. Puzzled students. And we could answer all those puzzles with the hydroplate theory. And we're going to tie up some of the loose ends tonight. And it's all encompassing everything from trenches and mid-oceanic ridge and the ocean to the ice age to the moon to Grand Canyon to meteorites to deuterium, even to fusing past irons. We can answer all that with the hydroplate. It's a very robust theory. So let's take a look at the man who invented it. This was discovered it. This is Dr. Walt Brown. He's a West Point grad. He was an Army Ranger, paratrooper, just sharp as a tack. He got his PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering in the heat transfer division. When he applied for MIT, he was in the 99th percentile. So he's very sharp. They ran the Benet military lab where there was dozens of PhDs and there was hundreds of people that he was supervised. And he taught at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He's a retired full colonel from the Air Force, just a brilliant guy. And when he was driving through Kansas, at the 70s, he heard on the radio that somebody said they found Noah's Ark on a mountain. So he took down the radio call letters and he contacted him and asked for the contact information on the person who said they found the Ark. And he got to meet him, and that guy would stay at his place occasionally. And they'd stay up into the night. It's like, well, if the waters covered the mountains, well, where'd all the water come from? And the guy, said, well, maybe it came from outer space. And then Walt said, well, but if that's the case, where did it all go? And so they're struggling with trying to put those pieces together. But then he thought, if fossils, if there was an ark on a mountain, that means the whole world was covered with water. And that would mean that there are a whole bunch of plants and animals got buried in mud and turned into fossils. And so then he started asking his PhD colleagues, what evidence do you have for evolution? If fossils are evidence for a flood and not evolution, what is there for evolution? And after a couple of years, he didn't have any evidence. And then he saw in the Bible. Then these are the other things too. This is the other hydroplate protocol. What biblical support does your theory have? What separates your theory from all the other ones? And with the hydroplate, you've got Psalm 136, to him that stretched out the earth above the waters. And Psalm 33, he gathers the water of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the depth in storehouses. And Genesis 7:11, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up. And then Job 38, hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? So there's clearly water inside the earth at one time. And the water was laid up in depth in storehouses. So storehouses of water inside of the earth. And he came up with the hydroplate theory. And it's got 4 phases to it. You got the rupture phase, the flood phase, the continental drift phase, and the recovery phase. And that's where we are today. We're still recovering from the flood. Okay, and so the one assumption is half of the ocean was inside the earth at one time. How it got there is not part of the theory. Most theories, they look at the effect and try and figure out what caused it. The effect is known, but the cause is not. This is different. He sets up the cause with only one assumption. Half of the ocean was inside the earth at one time, 60 miles below the earth's surface. And I think that number is going to change. I think 60 might turn into 30 or 40 because he made that 60-mile, he wanted to allow for the trans-Neptune objects. And I think, it's just, they thought, the mass up there, that's when they thought it was a solid rock. But I think they're loosely held boulders, so they're not as dense, so you won't need as many miles of sediment to account for that. So at any rate, that's what it is. Half the water was inside the earth, 60 miles deep. So just think of the earth as a big apple. The skin is 60 miles thick, made of granite. And then underneath that is a layer of water about a mile thick. And then underneath that, there's the mantle. And so that's what you got. And so that's the one assumption. And then you let the laws of physics go at it, and then it fits everything perfectly. And how do you get the laws of physics? You throw the moon in there. because the moon's going to tug on the Earth and the crust is going to stretch twice a day, stretch and compress twice a day. And back then, the crust wasn't broken into plates like it is today. It was just the crust. So it'd stretch and compress, stretch and compress, stretch and compress. It would generate heat. Like if I had a wire up here bending it back and forth, it's going to get hot. Well, the crust got hot. The heat went into the water. The water got hot. It got hotter and hotter and hotter. It wanted to boil, but it couldn't because there was no room to expand. So then at 705 degrees and 3200 psi, it became supercritical water. Yeah, it's not ice, it's not steam, and it's not liquid. It's supercritical. And whatever it is, it's not really water, it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So now it's starting to dissolve the granite above and the mantle below, and it's starting to mix together things like calcium carbonate and silicon oxide and sodium, which is chloride, which is salt. You're getting limestone mixed together and chalk and quartz. And keep in mind, when limestone forms, for every carbon atom precipitated in limestone, a carbon atom is released into CO2, is released in CO2. And there's 60,000 times more limestone on Earth than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So how does that happen? Well, the carbon dioxide just kept on getting recycled underneath in the fountains of the Great Deep or the subterranean water chambers. So it didn't go up to our atmosphere and poison it. It just kept on getting recirculated. And Dr. Walt Brown, he's more than just a mechanical engineer. He took classes at Arizona State, and he sat at the feet of Dr. Bob Dietz. He's the guy that came up with the term seafloor spreading. And so for the people that say that Walt doesn't have a geology background, well, yeah, he doesn't have the degree, but he learned from one of the sharpest guys there was for plate tectonics. And they would meet every Wednesday and talk for an hour or two about things. And so he had a very good mentor, to learn about this. And one time he asked Bob Dietz, hey, where'd all the limestone come from? And Dietz said, beats the blank out of me. Okay, so he's really diving into this, trying to get the best information that he can, and he came up with incredible theory. And so anyhow, the crust is getting weaker and weaker as it's dissolving more and more. The water's getting hotter and hotter, and the pressure's increasing and getting more and more. And Walt Brown says there was 372,000 psi in that water in the subterranean chambers. Think of that, 372,000. If I had a water bottle and this is under that much pressure, 372,000, and I just cracked it open, it'd probably destroy my house easily. Just boom, it would just erupt out of there. And so eventually the crust gets so weak that it cracks. And that crack goes in two directions all the way around the Earth and comes together like a seam on the baseball. And I think that's what happened in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day where all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So I think that's what's happened. That's when the pressure got so high inside that it cracked the earth, and then it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And people say, well, if that happened, that's the rupture phase right there. We're in phase one, the rupture. The water's just shooting up like crazy. And people say, if that happened, wouldn't it leave a mark? And it's like, yeah, it did. It's called the Mid-Oceanic Ridge. It's a 46,000-mile mountain range that goes through the bottom of every ocean, and then it comes together where that circle is. So Walt thinks that's where the crack ended. So you run the movie backwards. He thinks it started up in Alaska. And then it went in two directions, and then it came back together again, and water is exploding out of there with all that pressure, and that's how you get it to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And that's also where we get our sediment for the sedimentary rocks. Because when you have sedimentary rock that doesn't have carbon in it, like limestone, it's 65 parts granite and 35 parts basalt. And I think that's because the granite is eroding on the bottom and on the sides, whereas the basalt is just eroding on the top. So the granite is eroding on two sides, where the basalt is just eroding on one side. And I think that's why you get that mixture. And so the water's coming up, and and now we're in the flood phase. And so it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and the water continues to rise until the 150th day. And what happens then? Okay, and keep in mind also, you got two 60-mile cliffs, and they're eroding. The water's just going up with such tremendous force, and it's crumbling in there. And keep in mind, You can only have a cliff 5 miles high on Earth. Otherwise, it's going to crumble. It can't withstand the weight of 5 miles. And this is 60 miles or 30, depending. I'm guessing it's going to drop. But it's all crumbling into this hypersonic water. And that's where we get the sediment. And then the cliffs are moving farther and farther and farther apart. And then pretty soon we're getting to the continental drift phase. It's getting farther and farther and farther apart, and it's about the day 150, day 151. They get so far apart, there's nothing pushing down on the mantle, so the mantle bulges. That's the mid-oceanic ridge right there. It bulges specifically in the Atlantic Ocean. It bulges, and then the continents start sliding. And they're sliding on supercritical water. And here's a Science Daily report. The Earth's crust is missing in the Atlantic, in the mid-Atlantic. It's exposed to the seafloor. Was the crust never there? Was it once there, but then torn away? If so, then how and why? Well, this is how. The cliffs got so far away it bulged, and then the continent slid away. That's how and why, and we can tell you when, too. This is during Noah's flood. And so now it's sliding away. And can you imagine how fast a skater or a hydroplate would slide down a mountainside the size of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, whose surface was 50 times slicker than liquid water? Supercritical water has a viscosity about 1/50th of that of normal water. Yeah, supercritical water provided almost no resistance to the massive sliding plates. It was much like riding on a cushion of air. Just think of a big air hockey table. You put some water on that air hockey table, and the puck's not going to slide real well. But you start shooting some air up, it's going to just fly like nothing. And I think that's what's happening with the hydroplates. They're sliding almost friction free, and they're getting going. And that brings us to the continental drift phase was about 1 day. And then it brings us to the compression event, which was about 1 hour. That's when the continents, which were sliding, North America and South America sliding to the west, and Europe and Africa sliding to the east. And then they keep going until they meet resistance, and then they buckle up and form mountains. And that's why the major mountain ranges are pretty well parallel to the mid-Atlantic ridge. And you notice the Rockies are twice as twice as big as the Andes. And I think it's because North America slid over the mid-oceanic ridge and had tremendous pressure there. And this says the continental drift phase ended with the compression event, the sudden crushing and buckling. Okay, crushing and buckling and thickening of crashing hydroplates. Earth's mountains, such as the Andes, were pushed up in less than an hour. Okay. And it says the acceleration portion, that's the blue one. It says accelerating, accelerating, and then deceleration, that's the red one. And said the mounting building lasted less than an hour at the maximum velocity of each hydroplate was about 170 miles an hour. Can you imagine a car going 170 miles an hour and then hitting a telephone pole or hitting something? The front end, that hood's going to buckle up. It didn't buckle up over millions of years. It buckled up rapidly. And that's what happened with our mountains. It didn't take them millions of years to form. They formed rapidly. And we see them. They're folded. There was sediment on them, and it was still moist. And then it got buckled, and the sediment, it bent. And then it got hard and turned to rock. It couldn't have been hard rock and then bend, because then it would break. And Psalm 104 talks about this. The waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. The voice of thy thunders they hasted away. Yeah, they hasted at the voice of thy thunders. Could you imagine what it sounded like when those mountains formed? And this would be the compression event. It slides in, and there's extreme friction, and it turns the granite and the basalt, the mantle, to lava. And it makes coal and oil deposits and metamorphic rocks such as marble and diamonds, and they all have carbon-14 in them, and about the same amount of carbon-14. So it's not contamination. And then this is the Gunnison Canyon. Just for scale, on the top, the trees on the top of that canyon are 15 feet tall. So this is a huge canyon that got compressed with tremendous force. Those are compression cracks. That white stuff in there, that's compression cracks. If it was a tension crack, rocks are pretty hard in compression. But if you try and stretch them, they just, at the weakest point, it'll just break and it'll be a straight line. But these are compression cracks. What force would cause that much granite to compress? And I would say that's when the plates hit resistance. And it's the same thing you see at the bottom of Grand Canyon, too, the Vishnu schist. Okay, so you got water. The plates are sliding and then the mountains buckle. They meet resistance and then it buckles up. And yet the sediment is still sliding on top. And the slide it's going to bevel off the slanted ones. It's going to keep going. And that's why there's slanted layers underneath flat layers in the Grand Canyon. And just imagine how much force it got to get that sediment going. And then some of this quartzite, I believe that's sand that turns into rock. It's, well, quartzite. And there's a quartzite block, 5 to 10 tons, way up there. It got lifted up into that sediment that's supposed to be millions of years old. It was formed down there and it got lifted up there. And those are Walt Brown's grandsons. I think it takes 2 days hike to get there. And that rock right there destroys millions of years. There's no way those layers were laid down millions of years. I mean, how did that get lifted up there? And you can look at the sides of it too. It's kind of rounded. So that was soft. It got lifted up in the mud and then it came to rest there and then it got to hard. Those are not millions of years. And that brings us to the recovery phase. That's where we are right now. And back then the mountains rose up. Well, and mountains are a big mass on a small base, so they sink in. If something sinks in, something's got to rise up, and that's the plateaus. What's the force? It's gravity, and what's the mechanism? It's hydraulic lifting. You got the mountains sinking in, squishing the magma out the sides, and it's going to keep building pressure until it block faults up a piece of the plateau, and then it'll block fault the next piece, and then it'll block fault the next piece and the next piece. And that's why plateaus typically have one, I think it's part of the definition, one side that's vertical. And I think that's how this happens. And then the plateau mystery. As that block faults up, some lava could get to the top, and the lava could get on top of the sedimentary rock and become hard. And then when the great denudation comes by to form before the Grand Canyon forms, this is two lakes that are draining. It drains away. It doesn't wash away the lava, but it goes around it. And that's what you see with Red Butte. It's 1,000 feet of Mesozoic sediment capped with volcanic rock. And I got to see that this year as we drove from Phoenix to Grand Canyon. There it is on the right. And there's a similar one called Cedar Mountain. So there's Red Butte. If you're going up the highway there, you're going to go to Grand Canyon Village and look across, and then you can go up to where the lookout tower is. And from the lookout tower, you can see Cedar Mountain, which looks real similar to Red Butte, except I don't think there's lava on top of this one. And it was interesting because that lookout tower, it's got windows going all the way around, and the window that pointed to this direction had a blanket over it. It's like, hey, we don't want you to ask questions about that one. But that's 1,000 feet tall or so, and that covered everything above Grand Canyon. What in the world removed all that sediment? And I would say that was two huge lakes, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. And that's a whole nother talk on the Grand Canyon. And we're trying to I was supposed to debate somebody on the origin of Grand Canyon, but he backed out 3 days before the event. And now there's somebody who's considering, who said he would, but we'll see if he does. And why was I at Grand Canyon? It's because there was a videographer. He wants to do a documentary on the Hydroplate, just like is Genesis history. That's what he's shooting for. And so we got some footage there. And if you ever, talk about Grand Canyon, hey, if the river carved the canyon, what carved the side canyons? They're just as deep, but they don't have a river. And why'd that river flow through that Kaibab Plateau instead of around it? Now, that little river cut a canyon 10 miles wide. And then why'd that river cut into the hard crystalline rock of the inner gorge instead of getting wider into the softer sedimentary rock? Those are just a few of the questions that need to be answered. But again, yeah, that one guy, he backed out, so we're trying to get somebody to step into his place. And what I like about Walt's book is he has these decision tables at the end of every chapter. He's got the theories on top and the features on the side, and then it's red, yellow, or green. Reds doesn't explain it at all, and that's what most of them are. And then the green, that's Hydroplate all the way down that left aisle. He's got just hits the ball out of the park. And my brother-in-law, he was taking some geology classes at a college, at a university, and they looked at all those theories that didn't work. And then on that Friday, the professor said, there's one theory we haven't talked about. Anybody know what it is? And the guy raised his hand and said, Noah's flood. And he said, you're right, but we can't talk about it. which is not how science should work. If you don't have a theory, you should look at everything, even if it comes from the Bible. But Grand Canyon did not form right after the flood because it would have been too soft. All those vertical walls would have collapsed in it. So it's not after the flood, but this hydroplate theory does explain it. Okay, so now you got the mid-Atlantic ridge rising up, and you notice those are tension cracks. Those are vertical, not compression cracks. So they're vertical and horizontal. How do you make a mountain range by stretching it in two directions? But that rises up. And similarly, when the mountains sunk in, something had to rise up. That was the plateaus. Well, here's something rising up. Something has to sink in. The mid-oceanic ridge is rising up. What sinks in? That's the Pacific Ocean. That's the Ring of Fire. That sucked in on the 151st day, I believe. And then all the water that was covering the earth, it gushed off. And you notice the Pacific is way different than the rest of the oceans. It's got more lava, or it's got more of the trenches, like the Mariana Trench. It's got all those volcanoes, 40,000 table mounts or sea mounts or whatever they call them. And then also they got the eighth continent, Zealandia. The sunken eighth continent reveals its buried secrets. And they found evidence of land-based fossils. So at one point in time, Zealandia was above, and then he goes on and he does the theories, plate tectonics versus hydroplate theory. And plate tectonics is green all the way down with two yellows. And plate tectonics is red all the way down with two yellows. So why are the creation organizations tying their wagon to a secular model and just speeding it up when they could be using this hydroplate theory, which makes accurate predictions and also has more biblical support? And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this into the mainstream. And it'll be interesting to see which museums will put it in there. Who's going to be the second museum to put it into their museum? I know that, let's see, there's a museum out in Broken Bow, Nebraska called Boneyards, and they have the hydroplate in there. We'll see who's going to be second? Who's going to be, are you going to be early to the party or late to the party? But the party's coming. This is the truth. And are you going to be looked at with respect in future generations, or are you going to be looked at with ridicule in future generations? Kind of like how we look at the people who opposed Ignaz Semmelweis, who figured out that you should wash your hands after doing an autopsy. And he was ridiculed. So those, and we look at them with not high esteem. That's how it's going to be with the hydroplate. Who's going to be looked at back at history with high esteem, and who's going to be thinking, man, what were they thinking? Okay. So at the 151st day, the mountains, the Pacific sinks in, and now the water that was covering the earth gushes off and to fill in the Pacific Ocean. And so now we got these submarine canyons at the mouth of most major rivers. There's canyons that are cut, into the continental shelf, but it's under a whole bunch of water that couldn't be cut in the way it is today. You've got some that are deeper than Grand Canyon, some that are longer than Grand Canyon, and yet you can't do that today. So what happened? Well, clearly the continental shelves were higher, and the water gushed off and cut the canyons, and then the continents have sunk in, and the ocean has risen up to cover the canyons with water. And there's a mega canyon under Greenland. That's a canyon that's under 2 kilometers of ice. Well, how does that happen? Well, that brings us to the Ice Age. Perhaps the longest standing puzzle in the Earth sciences is what caused the Northern Hemisphere ice sheets to come and go. Yeah, why did it start? And then once it started, why did it stop? Well, that brings us to the hydroplate theory. We can explain this. See, an ice age is basically it snows more than it melts year after year after year after year. And notice up in Alaska and parts of Siberia there's no glacier in the ice age. How do you not have a glacier where there's permafrost today? Well, again, to get to get an ice age, you need to have more precipitation, and you need warmer oceans to get the precipitation, and you need cooler continents so it comes down as snow and it doesn't melt. Well, okay, so why didn't Alaska and parts of Siberia have it? Because it was lower. It came down as rain and not snow, and it was closer to the ocean there. Okay, and so it's going to build up year after year after year, 400 or 500 years of it snowing more than it melts. You got the ice age. Okay, but what's happening during that time is the oceans are cooling off. Why do you have warm oceans? Well, those volcanoes in the Pacific Oceans, those are going to heat it up pretty good. And so they're cooling off over time. And then also the aerosol that's in the atmosphere, which keeps the sun's heat from heat reaching the earth, that starts to clear up too. So 400 or 500 years of the snowing more than it melts, and a couple hundred years, 1 or 200 years of it get melting, and so we're still recovering to it from it. And we've got lakes in Antarctica under 2 miles of ice. Yeah, how did that happen? And there's even 91 new volcanoes between Antarctica's ice. Yeah, so that could have something to do with the ice melting, not so much the climate. And on that topic, everybody should read Inconvenient Facts by Gregory Wrightstone and also go into co2science.org to get all the information to make informed decisions. Okay, and that brings us to the frozen mammoths. They're all over the place up north, but there's one in particular that was frozen standing up, the Berezkova mammoth. And how does a mammoth freeze standing up? That's a tough one. And still had identifiable food in his stomach, so it had to be flash frozen. Well, the hydroplate theory, how did it get so cold so fast during late summer? Because that's what the food showed. That brings us to cold hail. Some of the stuff that was shooting out of the great deep was going up with such tremendous force that it escaped our Earth's atmosphere and went into outer space, which is a huge cold sink. It just sucked the heat out of there. And then the Earth's gravity grabbed a hold of this ice and, frozen carbon dioxide, which would be dry ice, plus all this sediment. It is like muddy hail, came slamming down on the mammoths and froze them. And these are the different theories of the frozen mammoth and the different feature on the top and the different features on the side. And again, you can add it, make it interactive. What other features should be considered? And that's what Bob Enyart was trying to do before he died. He thought these should be interactive. People can add more features to it. This would be a great place to do this. And then Walty's got all these footnotes for every one of these topics and all these theories, and he critiques it. Just an excellent resource. He's given you all the information so you can make an informed decision. That's how science should be, instead of just pushing one theory over and over and over again. Okay, so then that's how that mammoths froze, and the mammoths don't live in the Arctic. They eat too much, they drink too much. How come they didn't thaw out? That brings us to the big roll. See, on the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, they pretty much cancel out. The mountains do, except for the Himalayas. And just think of the Himalayas as that red dot. That's a big mass on a spinning base. And so the spin is going to try and get to the outside of that spinning ball. And that's what's happening with the Earth. Notice how it started on the top and now it's on the side. That means that there's something at the side that's now at the top. And that's exactly what happened with the mammoths. They're fat and sassy with all this water and all this food in Mammothville. And then the Himalayans form and spin the Earth rolls. So it brings Mammothville up to Mammoth Chill, where they did not thaw out, and they're still in the permafrost today. Okay, and we also find that in Axel Island and Ellesmere Island. These are north of the Arctic Circle, and you find fossil evidence of snakes, tortoises, alligators, badgers, shrews. They can't live in permafrost, plus the redwoods. Fossil oddity. How do those grow up there? They didn't grow up there. They got rolled up there. And this says the South Pole is mostly covered by ice, but fossils show that crocodiles, dinosaurs, and palm trees once lived on that land. Okay, so the same thing with Antarctica. It was on the side and it got rolled down to the bottom. That's what happened there. And you say, well, if that happened, wouldn't it leave a mark? And the answer is yes. It's the Earth is not round, perfectly round. It's got a bulge at the equator, and as the Earth rolled through that equator, it cracked the Earth. It cracked the crust, and that's the 90 East Ridge. Notice that ridge there going pretty much straight up and down. It's about 3,100 miles long, and that points directly at the Himalayas. So my guess is that the Himalayas formed 3,100 miles farther north than where they are today. That would be my guess. And then something on the mammoths lived 3,100 miles, farther south than where they are today. Again, that's my guess. My guess. Okay, and then what caused the inland seas to form? Like the Gulf of Mexico and the Mediterranean and the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, they all have huge amounts of salt at the bottom. They got these salt blooms. I was thinking maybe Lake Superior and the Great Lakes were that, but we don't have the salt. So I'm not sure exactly how that formed. Then how do chondrules form in meteorites? Well, what's a chondrule? It's a small rounded particle embedded in mostly stony meteorites called chondrites. And they're formed at high temperatures. And how the chondrules were melted is not understood, but the hydroplate theory will explain it. They had high velocity collisions and were cooled quickly. And then the other question that we can answer is, how were the heavy chemical elements from iron to uranium made? And you can learn more about that on Brian Nichols' YouTube channel, The Origins of Earth's Radioactivity. He's got something on every one of these hydroplate things, the origin of Grand Canyon, the origin of limestone, the hydroplate overview, just excellent. If you want to see, how this all fits together, these are important videos to watch. But the key to all this is granite. It's made of quartz, feldspar, mica, and hornblende. And quartz is the key right here. It's piezoelectric. If you stretch it or you compress it, it makes a spark. So every time if it's in tension or compression, it's making sparks. And you can have these things like lightning inside of the granite. Why do lights sometimes appear during an earthquake? Mysterious flashing earthquake lights may be explained. What causes eerie earthquake lakes? And I think it's that piezoelectric stuff. They're seeing the sparks from them. So how do the chondrules form in meteorites? Again, they had high velocity collisions and quickly cooled. Well, what's going to cause a high velocity collision? How about when the granite, those plates are fluttering? It's going to slam down. Boom, that's going to be the high velocity collision. Then it's going to go to the end, and then it's going to wait until enough pressure builds up, and then it's going to get shot into space. Boom. And all the while, that granite is that piezoelectric stuff. It's making sparks. So that's how he had the high velocity collision, and he also had it cooled quickly. High velocity collision. It was formed in high temperatures. That's the supercritical water. Had a high velocity collision. That's when the hydroplate slammed down onto the bottom, and then it got shot up into outer space, and that's how it cooled quickly. And so makes perfect sense. And this one, I don't have time to go through this. You're gonna have to get this from Brian Nichol. Basically, they were formed. You can Z pinch it, hit with something, a hot dot and it's gonna form these 94 natural elements. And it's the same ratio of elements as we find here on Earth. And it's going to decompose. And then he's got a decision theory, or a decision table there. How do you explain the Earth's radioactivity? The hydroplate theory is green all the way down except for one yellow. And then the chemical evolution, that's red all the way down except for a few yellows. Okay, and so what caused the inland seas to form with that sparking that's going to cause some radioactivity, and then it's going to make some weak points, and that's going to explode out. And it's going to explode out with some tremendous force. Boom, you got the inland seas. And then you got these salt domes. Under the Gulf of Mexico is a single salt layer called the mother of all salt layer, a mother salt layer. It is at least 20,000 feet below sea level, 100,000 square miles in area, and 1,000 feet thick. Many tall salt domes rise several miles above the mother salt layer. Some salt domes are taller than Mount Everest. Isn't that interesting? And the sediments, almost 30,000 feet thick, were then deposited on top of the 1,000-foot thick mother salt dome. So yeah, you get this salt. I think that salt was made in the fountains, made in the subterranean water chambers, and then when it exploded to make the inland seas, then the sediment came and covered it up. Okay, yeah, wet salt can float up through denser, freshly deposited sediments, and that would fit with the hydroplate theory. And then some of this stuff was going with such tremendous force it went into outer space. And they found sea plankton found on the outer surface of the International Space Station. And it's baffled. Astronauts are baffled about that. And then it said, okay, well, if it really did happen, okay, let's see. Whoa. Okay, the comet close-up, world of surprises. Yeah, they're finding stuff on Earth, and he's got a decision theory for comets, too. The theory's on top, and then the hydroplate, and then the features on the left. And again, hydroplate is green all the way down except for one. Okay, and you can learn about the trans-Neptune object talks. This is by a professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and it's incredible. You can see that at hydroplate.org or also on Rumble or on YouTube. So that's the theory. The rupture phase, the flood phase, the continental drift phase, and now we're the recovery phase. And some of this stuff was going up with such tremendous force that it went into outer space, and that's where we get our comets and our asteroids. And NASA discoveries are validating that. And I'm just going to show you this quick video, and I want you to keep it in watch Doug's expressions. He'll be on the bottom right.
So let me know what you think.
This is the most insane space news in a really long time. This asteroid called Bennu is 63 million kilometers away. That's 160 times farther than the moon is. Over the last few years, this spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx traveled all the way there, touched its surface, grabbed a sample, and brought it all the way back to Earth. And what they found in that sample is insane. It's rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential to life as we know it, but we've seen that before. The asteroid is also covered in a mineral called serpentine, which looks like this. And these samples look just like the type of rock that we find here
at the oceanic ridge.
This is where the stuff from the mantle of the Earth comes up and touches the water. It's underwater. Scientists think that this asteroid could be a chunk of an ancient small ocean world. This could be a piece of an old watery planet that's been traveling through space for billions of years, and we just took a sample of it.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We have a few minor tweaks for, first of all, that watery planet, let's call it Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin Lee likes to say. I wanted to get your reaction, Brian, because when I saw that, I'm like, wow, she works for Walt Brown and Real Science Radio and creating a short for us without us having to do all that production effort.
Yeah, she needs a raise, I think. Man.
Well, what everyone just saw on display was an example of a victim of the government schools, a victim of the deceptions and the errors that Brian has uncovered. That girl, to not even consider that this giant water planet is Earth, but that it's been traveling through space for millions of years, is because she has been victimized by exactly what Brian's been uncovering. And it's actually sad. It's sad to see, but it is instructive as to the work we have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what we need to do is have multiple theories. This is what Dr. Thomas Chamberlain wrote about over 100 years ago. He warned researchers not to let one hypothesis dominate their thinking. Well, that's what's happening in our government schools. You got the blind chance perspective. It's the Big Bang and evolution. That's like thinking this computer got put together by blind chance. That'd be absurd. How much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance, because we're a lot more complex than that computer. And even in our creation museums, they got one flood model. We should have multiple flood models and let people think. Okay, so instead they should always have or seek to have multiple working hypotheses. So then they can sharpen their analytical skills, develop thoroughness, reduce bias, and compare and contrast. Otherwise, they simply memorize and conform. And that's what's happening in our government schools. They're not thinking, they're just memorizing what they're being spoon-fed. We need to give them all the information so they can make informed decisions and think critically. The critical thinking skills are very, very lacking. And Walt Brown said every student should do an origins project. Just look at all the evidence and come to your own conclusion. Was it by blind chance or evolution or creation? And it doesn't matter what they pick, but they need to be able to support it logically. And he said that would do a good service for developing critical thinking skills, because right now they're just memorizing. Okay, so these are all those unexpected fossil oddities things. And there's the highlights. The fossil oddity we touched about. The moon is rusting and they don't know why. And the Earth's crust is missing. We talked about that. And then there's rounded boulders. The world of surprises. Hard to believe, major mystery how two objects each the size of skyscrapers could collide without blowing each other to smithereens. It's especially puzzling in a region of the solar system where gravitational forces would normally involve collision speeds of 4,500 miles an hour. That's right, it can't happen with the Big Bang, but it can happen with the hydroplate theory. If you got two objects that are going from the same place at the same velocity, eventually they're going to come together gently. And that's what we see. And that sounds too complex. It's a major mystery. All these weird orbit puzzles scientists, and it's orbiting in the wrong direction. And it's sea plankton. Yeah, it's they're all a mystery because they have the wrong perspective of the past. They got a blind chance perspective based on the Big Bang and evolution. And even plate tectonics, they got the wrong perspective. What mechanism would cause a large volume of low-standing continents to rise rapidly in the air to make a plateau? We have then a double-ended mystery, for the Colorado Plateau seems to have grown downward at the same time that its emerged part rose upward. How do you fuse past iron? Again, that's the fluttering of the crusts. And now this is the key here. Widespread belief systems seldom change when frequently reinforced by influential institutions such as the universities, media, religious institutions, and the scientific and intellectual elite. And that's where we are right now, folks. There's a widespread belief systems, and you only get funding if you go along with their belief system. And we've got the answers. We've got the truth. So this is what we need. But when vast numbers of people realize that they have been misled, an intellectual revolution begins. That's right. We can get out of the dark ages. I think the hydroplate theory will lead us out of the dark ages where people are forced to think in this material box. They can only think in that matter and energy box. And if the answer is not there, they'll never find it. And the answer is not there. And so, and even, I think a good first step in that would be our major creation organizations, allowing people to think about different flood models instead of just promoting their own. Give people the ability to think and come to their own conclusions. And so you got two theories up there. You got the catastrophic plate tectonic and you got the hydroplate theory. And then you can have them compare and contrast. Now, and observers of the revolution should note which side avoids a rational scientific debate. Yeah, how many evolutionists are stepping up to the microphone? Thank God for standing for truth. Was able to do two of them. Oh yeah, and we're also putting a team together. If you want to be part of this hydroplate team, if you want to be early to the party and you want to make this happen, go into hptwins@proton.me. We got everything we need. We just don't have enough people yet. And it is a lot of fun. And again, we want to do the roundtable discussion. If you know any catastrophic plate tectonics people that want to compare and contrast these two theories, there's an open mic for them. And again, keep in mind who's stepping up to the microphone. We're still looking for somebody to debate the origin of Grand Canyon. Who's stepping up to the microphone and who's not. And then this kind of explains what has happened. This is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, because Jane Ulbricht, she did some research on this, why this has been kicked to the curb for so long, and it didn't make any sense to her until she read this book. Science may reveal anomalies. They may accumulate to the point where normal science becomes difficult and where weaknesses in the old paradigm are revealed. That's where we are, folks. There's difficulties in evolution, there's difficulties in the Big Bang, and there's difficulties in plate tectonics. Okay, that's phase 2. Phase 3 is unable to account for anomalies. There's a crisis period. That's where we're at. Now all they can do is censor people or fire them who's first questioning them. Paradigm 4 is a paradigm shift, a scientific revolution. Underlying assumptions of the field are re-examined and new paradigm is established. We're on the cusp of that. Are you going to be early to the party or late to the party? We're looking for the early goers. And then that's what happened. Post-revolution, the new paradigm's dominance is established. So science then returns to normal science, solving problems within the new paradigm. The Big Bang is falling apart. The origin of life is not happening. The evolution is falling apart, and the mutations by natural selection is all falling apart. Carl Werner did a talk for the Twin Cities Creation Science Association, and it was titled 2024, the year evolution died. And he just goes on and says, we're watching all these things, all these paradigms, all these dogmas fall apart right before our eyes. And it is so much fun. Okay, so now this would be the Real Science Radio protocol. They've got a list of answers to the hydroplate theory objections. Go into rsr.org/answers and you'll see a bunch of published criticisms of the hydroplate and also YouTube criticisms. And then they go through and they answer them. Wouldn't it be neat if the evolutionists had a page like this, the criticisms of evolution? Wouldn't it be neat if the creation organizations had a page that had criticisms of catastrophic plate tectonics? I mean, so people can get all the information. And again, Walt Brown says, question everything yourself, starting with this book. Well, this book hopefully is coming out, the 9th edition, new 9th, but if you can't, you can download it for free. This is a proofreading copy. The new one's got a whole bunch of changes, but this will give you the basics for it. This would be rsr.org/HPT, and then you see the book cover there, and you click the 9th edition, and then you can download the PDF. And it is so much fun. You just search predictions, and then you can see his page of predictions. And then I would suggest that you go to an rsr.org/HPT interviews. Walt Brown Week is what I listened to those interviews, and it colored in all the details. I've never seen the Earth or the solar system the same again. And it just goes through over, but there is a controversy. Why has this been kicked to the curb for so long? And if you're interested in that, you can go into rsr.org/HPT. And that's Jane Albright. She's got some documents. She's also got some interviews. And so there's a story behind the story. But Brian Nickel has a great, he's got a really good YouTube channel where you can get up to speed visually. And I suggest these things: Brian Nickel's Hydroplate Theory tutorial, Walt Brown Week on RSR, and you can get all of these at Real Science Radio, rsr.org at their bookstore. And then Jane Albright. You can listen to what she found out interviewing 17 creation leaders about the hydroplate. And I'll just leave you with this. These are some good sources to go to: hydroplate.org. That's where you can see some of the latest articles. And you can also go into the Hydroplate 2023 conference. You'll be able to see all those. rsr.org, that's my favorite website. When I was driving down to Iowa to give a creation talk, I listened to it the whole time. rsr.org/HPT or /answers. And then if I want dinosaur soft tissue, I just, type in dino soft tissue, and I get to listen to Brian, let's see, what was his name? The guy from ICR. It forgets my name, but you listen to all these scientists. And then YouTube, there's Brian Nickel channel, and then my channel is Solidify Your Faith. And then if you want to be part of getting this into the mainstream, HPT wins at proton.me, because this is a battle. We've got the answers, but we need to be able to help just need to help other people that we've been deceived. Plate tectonics, hydroplate, evolution and the Big Bang are falling apart. And with that, I think I will stop sharing my screen, and we can do some Q&A. All right. Well, hopefully people stayed awake. Let's see here. Okay, there we are. Good deal. So that was kind of a sip out of a fire hydrant, but does anybody have any questions or comments that I can hopefully attempt to answer?
This is Belinda McPherson, and someone asked me this before, and so this is going to sound like not a good question, but I don't know how to answer it.
Okay.
If all this was going on, how did the boat, the Ark, how did it survive all that? Do you have any good things to say to that question?
Yeah, well, that is a good question. I mean, God could have protected it, or it also could have been built in such a way that it could withstand it. But yeah, that is a good question. Maybe God had it, because, God was inside that ark. He could have, and it's interesting with the different versions. Some say, King James says, come into the ark. Another one says, go into the ark. But that is a good question. I'm not sure how that happened or how it was protected. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
I believe that too. I just didn't know if you had any other thing that I could add to that when I was asked that before. I just didn't know what to say other than God took care of it.
Yeah, and he might have had a really strong roof. I don't know. He might have had it built to withstand that too. There could have been timbers up there that were pitched together. And yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, but that was a good question. Let's see. I've got everybody muted. So I don't know, can you unmute yourself, or do I need to do that for the people?
I think they can do it
I
themselves.
did it for me.
Okay. Yeah. If you guys, feel free to unmute whoever. But yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just trying to invite people to ask questions if they have any.
Okay.
Yeah, Brian, this is Matt. So thanks for your talk. I read Walt's book probably, 15 or 20 years ago, one of the earlier editions, and it's just been fantastic. I haven't done a lot of work lately, but early on, I went and looked on the internet And I actually could find very few people that would even have any serious critiques of it. I just felt like people were ignoring it. And I noticed that you actually had, I'm going to go check it out. It looks like on your Real Science Radio website, you guys have a list of common frequently asked questions or common criticisms of it. So I'm really anxious about that. But do you see people starting to engage with it, even if it's in a negative way, or are people just kind of sort of pretending like it's not there?
Yeah, they're starting to engage in it, especially now that we're trying to get people to sit down at the roundtable discussion. And the questions they asked showed that they did not have an understanding of the hydroplate. And so, but yet these are the people that other creationists are depending on to see if the hydroplate theory is good. I
Yeah.
know that happened to me, or I heard a creationist speak, and it was during Q&A, and asked him, "What do you think of the hydroplate?" And he said, "It doesn't work." And I asked him, "Why not?" He said, "Because it breaks laws of physics." And I said, "Which laws of physics?" And he said, "I don't know, but the geologists I know don't go along with the hydroplate," which is very similar to talking to an evolutionist about creation. Well,
Right.
the creationists or the evolutionists he knows don't go along with creation. And so, it's an interesting one. It's yeah. But yeah, there have been critiques. I didn't really realize that until I listened to Brian Nickel answer the hydroplate questions like on heat
Mhm.
and stuff like that. But yeah, and that's one of the things. Maybe I can show you one more thing.
Yeah, I think that was the main one I had seen, but this has been years. And one of the things that occurred to me is Walt's book, when I got I think I got the seventh or eighth edition, it was 300 pages.
Oh yeah.
By the time he got to the ninth edition, I think it's over 600
Yeah.
pages. And
Yeah.
it's like an engineering textbook.
Oh yeah.
It's just amazing. And so it's probably pretty difficult for a person, unless they really do a sustained effort to read it, because there's so many pieces that fit together in it. It's
Right.
really difficult to get in just an overview. So hats off to you for covering so much ground here. And somebody might have to listen to it several times and go watch more videos and stuff like that. So I encourage people to do that, because there's so many things that you have to read about and understand. And Walt just did an amazing job with all the illustrations, and he's got many appendices with technical analyses and models and calculations and all kinds of things. And then Brian Nichols's videos are fantastic too. So I'd encourage people to take a look at those as well. It's just there's an amazing amount of things to understand that go into trying to explain how all the different things come together. So thanks for your time tonight.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it's so fun to go do Walt Brown surfing, And that's what I like about the book instead of the PDF is I can be outside and I'll just, I'll hit this one footnote and I'll go to that and that'll lead me to another footnote and I'll go to that and it's just so all encompassing. And it's written at an understandable level, and then at the end of each chapter it's got a lot of the stuff that goes over my head. And you're right. I think what the hydroplate needs is an introductory book. Just this is just the introduction. This is the mechanism, and
Yeah.
this is what points to it being accurate. And then I think if they had a Grand Canyon book, because their theories, they don't have theories that work for at the Grand Canyon. They got 4 theories on their webpage, and none of them work. And this one does work, and it explains a lot of those anomalies. So if there's anybody out there who wants to take that under their, that would be that's one of the dominoes that we need to have fall is make it more understandable, more accessible, and even kids' books, whatever,
Mhm.
even, Christian school education, their curriculum design, have this, look at a theory, and you could show them both, let people see both theories instead of just one. But yeah, it's a tremendous all-encompassing book or theory.
This is Keith. I might have missed in and out of the some
Can't
of the,
imagine
but
why.
I'm sorry, what?
Can't imagine why.
I can't either. Um, but a lot of chaos and crying too ensues. But what is the main? I mean, I have answers in Genesis stuff. We've been to the Ark. We've been to all the Creations Museum. what is the main difference between this idea versus the plate tectonic?
Well, I would say accurate predictions and NASA discoveries and biblical support. I asked one of the main catastrophic plate tectonic guys, what accurate predictions have you made, and what are your current predictions that you expect to have
Mhm.
done? And he said, we don't make predictions. And then I asked him, well, what biblical support separates your theory from the other theories? And basically, I said, what's your biblical support for your theory? And he said, Genesis 6 to 8. It's just the flood chapters, but that doesn't separate it. And so, and also, where did the water come from for them? Basically, they think that the fountains of the great deep was lava. Lava hit the water and that caused it to steam, and that's what caused it to rain. And then it wasn't really the flood, it was tidal waves. When the water didn't cover, I mean, it didn't cover it all at once. It was just tidal waves getting sloshed up and down, six big tidal waves. And so that would be my two. It would be accurate predictions. That's the main difference.
Mhm.
A theory that's making accurate prediction is probably on the right trail. Then
Hey,
also
Brian,
NASA.
if I could chime in for a minute too.
Yeah.
One of the things about catastrophic plate tectonics, which is another theory that's out there, I think in general they have kind of picked up and used. There's also, I mean, the secular theory that covers some of these topics is just called plate tectonics,
Right.
which is this idea that there's convection currents inside of the Earth in solid rock that are really slowly moving the continents over millions and billions of years. And that's driven by some unknown, unidentified force that's moving, continent-sized pieces of rock. And they theorize that there's convection currents of heat or something, radioactive decay, something is driving that. It's heat and convection. And I think of catastrophic plate tectonics as kind of that same idea, but sped up really fast.
Right.
But they still have this idea that some of these plates dive down under the surface because of density reasons or something like that. With hydroplate theory, one of the big differences is that the driving force was a bunch of energy that was trapped at the beginning and did this massive rearrangement of the Earth's surface. And it does explain all of the things we observe, that the continents still do move a little bit, very slowly, not nearly as fast as they moved during the flood. And there's still volcanoes and there's still earthquakes, but all of that is basically the residual energy of the Earth sort of slowly settling and recovering. And I don't know if you know this, but every time there's an earthquake, the Earth kind of compresses a little bit. It's like it's packing a little bit tighter as rocks slide against each other, and it gets a little bit smaller, and it actually spins a little bit faster by like milliseconds when there's a huge earthquake. So that's one of the big differences, in my mind, is that there's this gravitational energy, which is very, very strong, which is driving a lot of these forces.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's this book called 20.
In the Earth, kind of this slow settling after this huge catastrophe that occurred thousands of years ago, which was the flood, and which rearranged the whole surface of the Earth. So that's kind of one of the major differences that I see that sets hydroplate apart from some of these other theories. If that's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the catastrophic plate tectonics, it's a secular model sped up. It's kind of like theistic evolution. It's a secular model with a cross on it. And I think we should use the biblical model. And there's a book, 20 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics. And if you go into that conference, there's Fred Williams, he did a talk on this where he talks, and they also interview the author, talk about it also on Real Science Radio. This is Tectonic Global Only. This is by N. Christian Smoot, and he mapped the ocean floors when he was in the Navy. And he says what's on the ocean does not match plate tectonics. When they came up with plate tectonics, they had no idea what was on the ocean. And let's see.
Book. What was that first book? I'm sorry. I'm trying to take a picture of it. My daughter's.
Yeah. And I'll put this up on my channel too, so
Okay.
people can screenshot it. It is 20 reasons to question plate tectonics.
Okay.
20 reasons to question plate tectonics, and that's by Ellis Hughes. And then this one was Tectonic Globaloney, and that's by N. Christian Smoot. And then I'll share my screen real quickly because Walt, he does talk about plate tectonics. And he's got this is on page 176 of that PDF. And let's see here, we'll play it. Okay, so this is what Walt Brown has to say. Okay, subducting plate would experience too much resistance and it would crush it or pull the plate apart. And volcanics and sediments, volcanoes, and plateaus have not been scraped off subducting plates in trenches. Sedimentary layers in trenches are undisturbed. There's no known force available to break the crust into plates and separate those plates from their bases. One plate cannot even begin its dive under an adjacent plate. Subduction cannot occur along an arc. And below trenches are mass deficiencies. And that should be, under those trenches, if you go over that, you're going to weigh less because there's less mass there. But if they're subducting down, that shouldn't be a problem. And let's see what else we got here. Yeah, because there's 3 locations on Earth where the plates would be going up and down at the same place. And then there's also miracles. He talks about the miracles of catastrophic plate tectonics. They'd have enhanced rate of nuclear decay during the event and a loss of thermal energy afterwards. And the rock suddenly became 720 degrees colder, and the rock's density would increase so much that it might fracture the Earth's crust globally, forming plates. That's miracle number 3. Then the edges of some plates might be so dense they would sink into the mantle. It's the big question. How did subduction begin? That's like, how did life begin? Where did matter come from? How did subduction begin? And let's see, the mantle was much less viscous than today. That's miracle 5. And temperatures cannot drop below absolute 0, so it's impossible for anything colder than a blazing hot 260 degrees Fahrenheit to drop to 720 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's miracle number 6. Cold rocks sink, hot rocks deep in the earth must simultaneously circle up to the surface. The heat is so great that it would take millions of years for just half of the heat to radiate from the earth. Therefore, he needs required miracle number 7. God must have removed the heat quickly. And miracle 8, to produce the blanket of sediment that is spread over the continents at an average of 20,000 or 2,000 meters. Let's see. He imagines there was a moon-sized body orbiting so close to the Earth that tides 1.6 miles high were produced in a few days, and those tides eroded the needed sediments, and then that went away. But he's since retracted that. He doesn't go along with that. Then there's other miracles. So those are screenshots. Yeah, they also said that radioactivity shows that the moon was created on day 4 or before day 4, which is not accurate. But anyhow, that's a little bit of stuff about CPT. And so we just want this discussion to take place. There's strengths and weaknesses maybe on both sides, but it should be discussed, I think, for science to advance. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, any more questions for Brian tonight?
Ooh. Yeah, I got something I might want. If nobody's got a question, I'll leave you because the big thing is how come, wouldn't it just boil the earth? And let's see where we at. I'll find this. Wouldn't it boil the oceans? Wouldn't it uh, just make everything too hot to let's see, too hot to expand. All right. There we go. Whoops. I think we found it. This is a video. Here we go. I'll play this. I'll share this and then play it. And it shows how liquid cools when it's expanding. It's the Joule-Thomson effect. Oh, I got too much stuff open here. So I'll share this and then you can watch it. Oh boy. Okay. Let's Sorry about this. Pilot error. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll play this video and then I think we can be done if there's no more questions.
Would I dare to take this glove away? Yeah, easy. Easy sitting there. No problem. Hot or cold? Begin with a C. It's cool. Relatively cool. HC. I'm not going to put it way down at the nozzle. It turns out that which you are seeing here, gang, is not steam. That which you can't see, that's the steam. But what does that steam do? Begin with the X. Expand. And when it expands, what's it do? Begin with another C. Cool. And there's your evidence of it right there. Isn't that remarkable?
Isn't that remarkable? Yeah, that's pretty amazing. You know, it's going to come up there. It's going to be very hot, but it's going to cool as it expands. So that answers one of the heat problems. That seems to be the major objection to it. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so much.
Brian, for coming and talking to us, and just appreciate your taking your time to be with us.
Oh, my pleasure. You know, some people love to hunt, some people love to fish. I love to talk about creation.
Okay.
So thank you for having that organization there that gets the truth out, because there should be more and more of these organizations. So may God bless your efforts.